President Muhammadu Buhari has approved the nomination of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, former coordinating minister for the economy, for the position of Director General of the World Trade Organization, WTO. In a letter written by Mr. Buhari, the candidacy of Yona Frederick Aga, Nigeria's permanent representative to WTO, for the same position was withdrawn, and Okonjo-Iweala named as Nigeria's nominee. The election is scheduled to hold in Geneva, Switzerland in 2021 for a 4-year term that will run from 2021 to 2025. Now, Mrs. Okonjo-Iweala, the perennially nominated Mrs. Okonjo-Iweala, I mean, did you see her list of credentials in that report? So impressive. And I'm really excited and hopeful for her, although I have to say there's another African woman in contention, the Kenyan diplomat and former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Amina Mohammed, who was actually beaten to the punch. She's contested for this position before, so she has been really supported by their president, as Mrs. Okonjo-Iweala is being supported by ours. May the best woman win, but obviously I know who I prefer.
Well, I definitely will prefer Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala.
Of course.
Who has the intellectual heft, the experience, the exposure, the pedigree, and the savoir-faire of international diplomacy that may be required in that position. And I would like to commend the federal government of Nigeria, and in particular President Muhammadu Buhari, for specifically nominating her and withdrawing the nomination of Ambassador Frederick Aga, Nigeria's permanent representative to the World Trade Organization. I think the nomination of Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is likely to attract more interest from the international community. Now, the election could be held much earlier because the present Director General of the World Trade Organization, Roberto Azevedo, whose tenure is supposed to expire next year, served notice earlier that he would like to step down by August this year. So it was on account of that on May 20, the WTO announced the nomination process, which is supposed to start on June 8th. And this is another point for commending the Nigerian government. Ahead of June 8th, the Nigerian government has already announced our nomination, and it has also written a letter to African countries for our support. I mean, this is a different way of doing things. And I hope that many Nigerians who complain about, the Buhari government favoring only people from the north will see what has happened in the last week with President Buhari's open and solid support for Akinwumi Adesina at the AFDB, and now the nomination of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala as, what they may describe, those critics may describe as, a welcome development or a departure from what they thought they had been seeing. But in any case, at the end of the day, the Director General of the WTO will be chosen by consensus among members of the Governing Council, about 164 of them. And the candidates are supposed to appear before the Governing Council, make a presentation, they will take questions, and then at the end of the day, a successor to the current Director General will be named by consensus. And we hope that it is Nigeria's Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala who will get that position. And the tenure is for 4 years.
Fingers and everything else crossed. But I have to say for Ambassador Aga, he has been the Deputy Director General, one of the 4. So he also has international chops and he also has political stature. But Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala obviously is a more widely renowned name. And she also has that ability to be a facilitator, which is what is necessary now. Another parallel I'd like to draw with the additional situation is that America has made threats to withdraw from the WTO. America has blocked the composition of the appellate body of the WTO so far. So the WTO really right now needs a real expert, somebody with the kind of credentials that Mrs. Okonjo-Iweala has.
Well, whoever emerges as the Director General of the WTO will have to deal with one of the major threats to the influence of that body, which has been the trade war between China and the United States. The United States threatening to withdraw from the WTO. I mean, it's not a new threat, considering the fight between China and the United States. And China taking a petition to the WTO. Dispute resolution being one of the major functions of the WTO, even as it facilitates trade. the next Director General of the WTO will also have to worry about the global economic contraction that has been occasioned by COVID-19 pandemic and the implications for the flow of international trade.
They have their work cut out for them. Now, the Nigeria Center for Disease Control has unveiled new guidelines for the treatment of COVID-19 patients, which will quicken their discharge from isolation and treatment centers. Under the new guidelines, which provide that a negative test will no longer be required to discharge a patient, symptomatic ones will be discharged at least 10 days after the onset of symptoms and at least 3 days without symptoms. For asymptomatic patients, they'll be allowed to go home 14 days after their first positive test. The release of the guidelines coincided with a further rise in COVID-19 cases in the country, with 350 new incidences, bringing the total to 11,516 number of confirmed cases in the country. The nation has also recorded 8 COVID-19 related deaths, raising the tally from 315 to 323 in the last 24 hours. 3,535 persons have also been discharged after successful treatment. A breakdown of the new infection figures show that Lagos recorded 102 new cases, Ogun 34, Federal Capital Territory 29, Borno 26, Kaduna 23, Rivers 2, Ebonyi 17, Kwara 16, Katsina 14, Edo, Delta, Kano, and Bauchi 10 each, Bayelsa 9, Imo 8, Plateau 4, Ondo 3, Nasarawa 2, while Gombe and Oyo recorded 1 each. Well, we're still in flux, aren't we? Guidelines are being altered all the time because, as we keep establishing here, this is a novel coronavirus. Nobody actually has a game plan. It's sort of, trial and error. But I'm glad that nobody is wedded to any particular strategy and there's a willingness to try out new things. So these are new guidelines, which I'm sure in the coming days will continue to change. Well,
Dr. Iheko has made it clear that this is in conformity with the result of science-based guidelines by the WHO. And I hope that it works in our own context so that it doesn't look like we're just copying what has been done elsewhere. He also said that, private hospitals and public hospitals should procure their own personal protective equipment, and they should add that, to the cost of treatment. 3, it's also been made clear that this message is strictly for the physicians, but that it's important for the public to also be informed. And it's good to know also that persons who have been treated and who have turned negative do not pose any threat to anybody. And I think that's a point that needs to be amplified, because when persons are discharged and you hear that this person had COVID-19, as an individual, you probably don't want to take any risk. But, Dr. Iheko, as we talked about that, and said there is no point people thinking that those people pose a risk. That's important. Yes. Well, that's all on the news headlines. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll have the trio of Rotus Adiri, Michael Wilson, and Aaron Akerejala to give us updates on Africa and global business and COVID-19. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Joining us now is our business correspondent, Rotus Adiri, who is here to give us the Africa business update. Good morning, Rotus. Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Tundun.
Yes, so much going on in Africa. I'm starting with investors snapping up African sovereign bonds. A lot of these bonds are rated junk, but with what's been going on with the risk-on mode that we're seeing across a number of markets, it's been a lot of enthusiasm for these bonds. Look at this chart here. This is from Standard Bank. African Sovereign Bond Yield Index that tracks a number of bond yields for a lot, mostly on the continent. The blue arrow, look at from about February through to March, when coronavirus issues were ramping up across the world, they started selling. Now, the key thing to note here is that, of course, you've got there's an inverse relationship between the yield and the price of a bond. So you can see the arrow shooting up from about 7% between February and March all the way up to over 12%. Investors started selling these bonds. I don't want to touch them. I don't want it. In doing that, selling it, the price went down, the yield went up. Then central banks around the world started responding, flushing, putting lots of stimulus around. These are developed market central banks. investors were flush with cash. They started running around the world looking for yields. They then moved to African bonds. And now, if you look at the shaded green area, those bonds then came down to under 9%. So that shows you buying activity. There's a lot of risk. The reason why a lot of African sovereign bonds are rated junk is because a lot of African governments are not able to pay. Angola is one of them. They are restructured. I think Zambia is another one. And so, there's risk with them paying them back. There is the fact that a lot of African governments don't have the stimulus firepower to react to COVID-19 as other emerging markets can. So there's a lot of risk there, but, as the saying goes, a rising tide lifts all boats. So that's what we're seeing. Very interesting there with African sovereign bond yields. Second thing to look at is the Petroleum Products Pricing Regulatory Agency. The letter they released releasing the cap on PMS pump price in Nigeria. So this is the memo that they released. Interesting thing is, if you look at what's highlighted at the top, the commencement is dated the 20th of March, 2020. That date is significant because it was 2 days after the 18th of March when the first price movement happened from 145 naira to 125. Why this memo was not released at that particular time, I don't know. It's anyone's guess. But anyway, the key things here, removal of, number one, if you move down, removal of the existing premium motor spirits price cap, so marketers are, free to set a price now, and then implementation of a market-based pricing regime for PMS, and then monitoring of market conditions, and then giving guides to the NNPC and the markets with regards to price. So that's what the PPRPRA is mandated to do. But again, this should have been out since the 20th, but it was just released. Either way, it's a good thing for the independent marketers so they can freely set the price, which I believe will now see prices go up. But we'll see how things happen there. Over to the AFDB and Kimome Additional. There's been a lot of back and forth, and a lot of news headlines are getting things mixed up with regards to exactly what decision the AFDB took. I want to start with Steve Mnuchin's letter. We're looking at Steve Mnuchin's letter to Madam Niale Kaba of the AFDB. And where he says we have deep reservations about the integrity of the committee's process. That is the ethics committee that investigated the allegations against Akumimi Additional, where they exonerated him of all the charges. He said, instead, we urge you to initiate an in-depth investigation of the allegations using the services of an independent outside investigator of high professional standing. So my reading of this is that Mnuchin was asking for them to start afresh with new investigations. Now let's go to the AFDB's response that was just released. They said, the Bureau agrees to authorize an independent review of the reports of the Ethics Committee of the Board of Directors. So my understanding of that is that the AFDB has decided that the board is going to get an independent body, but they're going to review what the Ethics Committee looked at. So it doesn't, some dailies are saying that, there's a new probe that's been announced and that they're actually going to fall in line with what America wants, which is a completely new investigation. But my reading of this with the letter that they sent out is that they are going to review the reports of the Ethics Committee. All right, from the AFDB to Somalia now. Somalia, okay, yeah, this is when the Additional met with President Buhari, and Buhari, gave him his support. Of course, we saw former President Abiola wrote a letter, Finance Minister, and so on and so forth. All right, Somalia now. The United Nations is calling for assistance for Somalia. They're supposed to be having elections later this year. One man, one vote. First time in about 50 years. But multiple headwinds. One, COVID-19 cases in the Horn of Africa and East Africa, one of the highest at 2,089. The UN says they're going through a heavy rainy season right now. That rainy season has displaced over 500,000 people in Somalia. The flash floods, as a result of the rainy season, has killed 3 people, also causing a number of diseases like diarrhea and cholera. They're also being hit by locusts. The locust issue has also been affecting much of East Africa, including Kenya and a number of Ethiopia, a number of other African nations, affecting farm produce. They're also facing terrorism. There was a May 31st terrorist attack, a roadside bomb that killed 10 people, wounded 12. I think they're linking it to Al-Shabaab. And so that's placing the elections that are supposed to be happening later this year into question, or early 2021. And then finally, what I talked about yesterday, now there's more information coming out. The company that's responded to the sexual misconduct allegations, it's Tizeti. And the lady in question is Kelechi Udogwo. She's the one who on Twitter 2 days ago said that the CEO, Kendall Anyani, exposed himself to her. He was her mentor and took advantage of that. Again, these are allegations, but the company has now come out and said that they are investigating it. Although a lot of public relations firms are saying that Mr. Anyani himself should have been the one to respond to this, but he's been quiet. He's locked up his Twitter account, And investors, though, investing in African tech, they're looking at this now and, shaking their heads. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Well,
Yes,
quickly,
indeed.
I don't think we have more time,
No,
but maybe, you want to shed more light on the PPPRA, removing the cap on the pump price of petrol. What does it mean in real terms? Does it mean that the pump price of fuel will go up?
Yes, that's what it means.
Okay, if that is the case, then the PPRA said it will be fixing the pricing template in line with the
market dynamics.
The market dynamics.
Yes.
Is it abdicating that role now and leaving it to the marketers?
No, see, the PPRA still said that they will monitor market conditions and provide a guide. But as we've seen, oil prices, crude has been climbing up now. And if you look at the cost of FX, what the independent marketers have to pay to bring food price in, that has to be factored into what they sell to you and I. So with market conditions, it would go up. But the PPPRA is still maintaining its role to monitor and guide. But marketers now can source. And that cap, the thing is, the cap is off. So now, if it costs more to bring in fuel, it's going to cost more to sell it to you and I.
Yeah, and nothing is being done about landing cost.
Well, that's
given.
That's given, yeah. This is all factored into
We only have a few
prices.
seconds, but I want to say I agree with what you said about different newspaper reports.
Yes, on AFDB, yeah.
I agree with your assessment. AFDB seems to have applied some kind of double jeopardy where additional is concerned. They will investigate the process, but not the individual. That's my reading.
It's a review.
Yes, that's what it is.
Of the ethics committee's
2 to 4 weeks review.
Yes.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to more business updates, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Yes, good morning. A bit of profit-taking yesterday after that ECB stimulus, the extended stimulus. In comparison with expectations, it was roundabout in line with that. The US markets, again, finished slightly lower, although it has to be said that the NASDAQ, once again in almost direct controversion of logic, actually reached into record territory yesterday. In Asia, the markets there a bit of profit taking too, a slight pause, but if you look over the whole week, it's been the highest rise from an admittedly low base for the past 8 years, the biggest weekly rise in 8 years. It was notable, I have to say, yesterday. I did smile a little, and I'm sure you did too when you heard the news, given our discussions that Reuben initiated earlier in the week about the German Constitutional Court. The ECB didn't seem too worried about that, quite honestly. They had to do something. Basically, it was tantamount to the ECB thumbing its nose, basically, at Germany, which I would have thought is a fairly dangerous thing to do. I know the ECB is all powerful and everything, but then again, so's Germany. It's a big economy. It's the powerhouse of Europe. The central bank, the ECB, has until August to justify the rationale behind what it's done. And that may mean no cooperation from the Bundesbank in the meantime. That's going to be very interesting. Now, if there's a big stimulus, you would expect the host currency, in this case the euro, to fall. It didn't. It rose. And I think that was probably a lot to do with the domestic stimulus plan that was announced by the German government, by the Bundesbank, to give €300 for each child to a family, and also to invest a lot into hydrogen for cars and so on. Now, again, that's something which is way down the line, but that's what they're doing. They are indicating a great degree of faith in their own economies. Also, the ECB's economic forecast from Madame Lagarde, there she is, insistence that the bank had to actually do something. And today's German factory orders will reinforce that. They will slow down, but Germany is not doing too badly. Now, the big one today is, there's Angela Merkel, the big one today is the United States and the jobs figures there, the big one today, which all the markets. Now, I'll just take you through what we've had so far. We had the proxy figure, which is benefit claims for unemployment, coming in during the week slightly below expectations at 20.5. However, today's figures will push it up will be another multi-million number. And once again, it will illustrate the fact that there is this chasm between the markets and what's actually happening to ordinary consumers in the United States. It won't be anywhere near April's number, but it may well press up, I think, the unemployment rate to around I don't know, 20% maybe, which is very, very high indeed in the United States. But if there's going to be any optimism at all, then you can expect the markets to round out the week with a decent rise. We'll also be looking today's figures at the average earnings figure, which will be higher. That will only be because a lot of lower paid people have been furloughed out of work. So therefore, the rise in slightly higher median incomes will be more. And that the Fed will be looking at that as being a sort of good indicator of what's happening in the economy in terms of inflation. Better say a long, long way to go. I've got one interesting little snippet for you. A major reversal of what's described in the markets as risk-off behaviour, i.e., if you're risk-off, then you don't want to take risk-off, and therefore you invest in safe havens like gold and currencies and the rest of it. But there'd been a huge move into US bond funds this week, $22.5 billion. That, to me, suggests that people are relatively optimistic about the way that the economy in the United States is actually going. And let's hope it has something to do with further expectations of the global economy.
Mr. Wilson, please hold your thoughts. We need to take a short break. When we return, we'll be back with more with Michael Wilson. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still with Michael Wilson joining us from London with more on the global business updates.
Well, Michael, if I may just come in here before we move on to other topics, I'd like to take you back to the ECB PPP that has now been expanded and extended. How are the markets responding since the new stimulus package exceeds their expectation? And should we expect the risk of an inflationary blowback?
I don't think so. I think that what you saw was an acceptance by the markets that it was more or less what they expected. I mean, it's difficult to be precise about these kind of things, but if you take the indicators that I was going through right at the beginning, the markets have been relatively, how can I put it, sanguine about what actually happened. So they've taken it all on board. The ECB had to do something. It's had to announce some pretty dreadful economic forecasts as well, which you would, of course, expect. And so I think that the stimulus program, and it has until August to explain itself. There are a couple of thorny issues, not least of which Germany and France, who are not that happy about the undermining, if you like, or a snub in the nose for their own proposals to do something. And particularly, you'll notice that Germany has had its own 130 billion euro stimulus package, which it has announced itself. I am not an optimist about the future of the European Union. I think that these are the strains that it's exactly designed to try to withstand. And I still do not understand how you have 26, 27 different countries at different stages of their economic growth and expectations, and no fiscal link, i.e. no tax link, no common tax link between all those countries, how you actually get something together. Behind my computer on my wall here is a very important document, and what it is, it's a bond from the United States of America. The United States of America did not have United States until there was a united political system. There certainly is not that in Europe, and I think there'll be further strains to come.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wilson. That's a really interesting take on it. I never thought about that, actually.
Yes, although Michael didn't talk about inflation, would this stimulus package result in inflation?
I don't think it will. The inflation target right now is so below, sorry, the actual inflation is so below this kind of commonly agreed 2% inflation target that if it did, it would take a long, long time for that to happen. If anything, I think that people are worried about a devaluation, deflation. And this is, of course, is one of the things that quantitative easing like this is designed to try to dispel. Because what it does is it tries to stop the banks hanging on to money and actually pushing it out and into the economy to try to boost prices. So I think any inflation from this is a long way down the line.
Well, thank you very much, Michael Wilson. Thank you very much indeed.
Now for an update on COVID-19 pandemic is Aaron Akerejala joining us.
Hello,
good morning, Aaron.
Yeah, good morning, Doctor.
How are you?
Looking flowery today. And lovely hair, by the way.
Thank you very much.
I know you wouldn't miss that.
No. All right, let's get straight into it. And this morning, it's quite sad what is actually playing out in Africa. And as a matter of fact, not just Africa, we'll be looking at how things are actually spiraling out of control in terms of cases of COVID-19 around the world. But let's start it off from Africa with a special focus on South Africa, because when you look at the numbers right now, in the last 24 hours, of course, you can actually see the entirety of the tests conducted, which is quite remarkable and commendable by the government of South Africa. 820,675 is the number of tests conducted, with well over 40,792 cases as of this morning, and recoveries of 21,311. But the shocking fact is the fact that in the last 24 hours, 3,267 cases have been recorded, and as a matter of fact, 56 of those cases between Wednesday and of yesterday evening, 56 had died, which is the highest number since South Africa started recording things in March. So you look at this and some of the high points there like Limpopo, but Western Cape province is actually giving South Africa a big headache because they're seeing recurrent cases more in that particular region. So
do we know why?
I have no idea, and they're trying to dig into the reason why things are actually spiraling out of control in that particular region. And at the moment, South Africa, we've spoken about the easing of the lockdown and what President Cyril Ramaphosa is actually, or the daunting task is facing, understanding that South Africa coming into this year had gone into a recession and they've been trying to stabilize the economy. But unfortunately for them, things are just getting bad. And they are still saying that they will still move into the next phase of the easing of the lockdown, but the cases are actually spiraling out of control.
That is, frankly, alarming, especially because it's in one particular area. We need to understand if there's like super spreader events, if there's a lack of social distancing. It needs to be made, it has to be clarified exactly what the problem is. It will be instructive for the rest of Africa. Yeah,
and without a doubt, Doctor, before we come to without a doubt, South Africa has the highest figure in the entirety of Africa. As a matter of fact, 40,792 is the one. You can see it there. From the entirety of Africa, 163,599 is the entire number of cases we've actually recorded in Africa. And of those, well over 40,000 is from South Africa alone.
Well, the thing to note is whether or not the number is related to the amount of testing that is being done by, per capita in South Africa, because South Africa also has the highest rate of testing. It's actually over 850,000 tests that have been conducted so far in South Africa. And, if that is the case, maybe that explains the reason why, the numbers are so high. The second point about about South Africa is Western Cape Province. I mean, the situation in Western Cape Province is so serious. It accounts for for about 52.4% of the total number of cases in South Africa. And so serious that President Ramaphosa today is going to visit. Maybe out of solidarity. I think it's the scientists that can determine what is responsible for whatever is happening there.
All right, let's talk.
Other African countries would need to ramp up testing.
True.
The Africa CDC has said, yes, some of the countries are waking up. Nigeria now has done just about close to 70,000, right?
Yes.
Now, if you look at our population of 200 million, 70,000 still looks like very small figure.
Especially when the target was 2 million.
Yes.
2 million tests in 3 months, yes.
All right, now let's actually spread it to the entirety of the world. And before we come into Brazil, which is actually worrying several people, let's also tell you that another hotbed and a lot of flashpoints is coming from India. Because looking at how things are actually playing out in India, we actually hear that with the way things are actually going right now, by mid-June, India are likely to be the 4th highest case of COVID-19 in the world. And you see that and you begin to wonder. And this India, just like South Africa, they also are facing their economic crisis, and they're also trying to ease the lockdown in a bid to probably give it a little bit of soft landing. Moving past the first one there, we'll get to understand even further what is really going on in India. as you can actually see, the graph actually shows that by the 1st of April, they had less than 1,000 cases. As a matter of fact, 424 cases. As of Wednesday, they had well over 8,820 cases. Now, if we move on to the next slide, you've got to find out that India is one of those countries that are recording. This particular graph shows the number of infections in the last 1 week. In the US, 21,245. In Brazil, in the last 1 week, 21,650. Now, this is not just the entire number. This is a number of cases that just recorded in the last 1 week. And you can also see that India, 7,631. So India is really, really turning to, his attentions are actually being focused on India and how things might spiral out of control in a matter of time. We are beginning to see this same thing happen in Brazil at the moment, whereby Brazil are posting very, very grim figures right now.
But India, unlike Brazil, had really a strict lockdown, which was, the terms of a lockdown are one thing, enforcing that lockdown is another. I guess the issue was with enforcement.
Maybe.
No, there was strict enforcement.
So why are the figures?
I think
like
what we have seen is a capricious nature of the virus itself. Because even in countries where lockdown had been eased, where you had a regimen of very strict protocols in place, we've seen the numbers going up. In Iran, in South Korea.
But the only way the virus can spread is through contact. So that means the lockdown was not actually being enforced or adhered to.
The theory about the effectiveness of the lockdown has been questioned.
Especially for
of course, that some scientists have said, look, the lockdown is not a cure-all solution.
Yeah.
These are some of the contradictions that this virus has presented.
It's so baffling.
Yes. Even scientists are saying, look, we don't understand this virus.
Yeah, India was on top of it.
Yeah, at a point.
Yes.
Now it's looking like things are actually just slipping through their fingers, literally.
Yes.
But before we go, Australia, they have actually, the health authorities, because as a matter of fact, everyone has been looking for the drug to probably combat COVID-19, and Australia have turned to the initial drug that was touted to be the silver bullet, talking about remdesivir, and although it is prohibited in Australia, but through some legislations, they've been able to ease it up, and at the moment, remdesivir is the drug that will be administered to patients who have actually tested positive for COVID-19. That's the first to-go-to drug for them, and they found that it should help accelerate the process for those who have mild cases, but severe cases, not so much.
Yeah, because, that was the recommendation of the clinical evidence task force.
Yeah.
And many countries are trying all kinds of drugs. Remdesivir, which you have mentioned, was a drug for Ebola.
Yes.
And now it's been tried in the United States and in other places. But as you pointed out, there is no cure yet. In some other countries, you have HIV drugs being used, like ritonavir, lopinavir, and lopinavir in some countries. And some of these drugs are part of the WHO solidarity trials. But the advice in Nigeria, for example, is that some of these drugs can only be used for clinical trials. But in Australia, that task force has gone ahead to say it can aid recovery. It is not a cure.
So back to full circle then, because we did start with remdesivir. Thank you, Aaron.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aaron.
A pleasure.